Shall we start? I'm Lady Rain, and this is the Reader's Nook, and we are on Chapter 6, Part 1. Part 1, Chapter 6, I should say. Chapter 6 is called Gardener on the Rocks. Part 1. Not long after dawn on the morning of July 4th, 1988, Gardner awoke. Came to, anyway. Near the end of the stone breakwater, which extends out into the Atlantic, not far from the Arcadia Fun World Amusement Park in Arcadia Beach, New Hampshire. Not that Gardner knew where he was then. He barely knew anything, save for his own name. The fact that he was in what seemed to be total physical agony, and somewhat less important fact that he had apparently almost drowned in the night. He was lying on his side, feet trailing in the water. He supposed that he had been high and dry when he had waltzed out here the night before, but he had apparently rolled in his sleep, slid a little way down the breakwater's slope north side, and now the tide was coming in. If he had been half an hour later in waking up, he thought he very well might have simply floated off the rocks of the breakwater as a grounded ship might float off a sandbar. One of his loafers was still on, but it was shriveled and useless. Gardner kicked it off and watched apathetically as it floated down into the greeny darkness. Something for the lobsters to shit in, he thought, and sat up. The bolt of pain which went through his head was so immense, he thought for a moment that he was going to have a stroke, or that he was having a stroke. That he had survived his night on the breakwater only to die of an embolism the morning after. The pain receded a little, and the world came back from the gray mist into which it had receded. He was able to appreciate just how miserable he was. It was what Bobbi Anderson would undoubtedly have called the whole body trip. As in, savor the whole body trip, Jim. What can be better than the way you feel after a night in the eye of the cyclone? One night? No way, baby. This had been a jag. Real fucking thing. His stomach felt sour and bloated. His throat and sinuses were caked with elderly puke. He looked to his left, and sure enough, there it was, a little above him, in what must have been his original position. The drinker's signature. A great big splash of drying vomit. Gardner wiped a shaking, dirty right hand over his nose and saw flakes of dried blood. He'd had a nosebleed. He'd had them off and on ever since the skiing accident at Sunday River when he was 17. He'd almost count on the nosebleeds when he had been drinking. At the end of all his previous binges, and this was the first time he had gone whole hog in almost 3 years, Gardner had felt what he was feeling now, a sickness that went deeper than the thudding head, stomach curled up like a sponge, filled with acid, the aches, the quivering muscles. A deep sickness couldn't even be called depression. It was a feeling of utter down. This was the worst ever, even worse than the depression that had followed the famous Thanksgiving jag of 1980, the one that had ended his teaching career and his marriage. It had also come close to ending Nora's life. He had come to that point in Penobscot County Jail. County Jail. A deputy was sitting outside his cell, reading a copy of Crazy magazine and picking his nose. Ew. Gardner learned later that all police departments are aware that jag drinkers frequently come off their binges deeply depressed. So if there happens to be a man available, he keeps an eye on you to make sure you don't eyesight it. At least, not until you post bond and get off county property. Hold on. Did I add that part? Yes, I did. I want to make sure that suicide disclaimer was there. Where am I? Gardner had asked. Where do you think you are? The deputy asked. He looked at the long green booger he had just scraped out of his nose and then wiped it slowly and with apparent enjoyment onto the side of his shoe. Ew. Squashing it down, smearing it along the dark dirt there. Gardner had been unable to take his eyes from this operation. A year later, he would write a poem about it. What did I do? Save for occasional flashes, the previous 2 days had been totally blank. The flashes were unrelated, like cloud rifts, which let through uncertain flickers of sunlight as a storm approaches. Bringing Nora a cup of tea and then starting to harangue her about the nukes. Ave Nokia Eterna. When he died, his final word on the whole fucking mess wouldn't be Rosebud, but nukes. He could remember falling down in the driveway beside his house, getting a pizza, and being so drunk, runny clots of cheese went down inside his shirt, burning his chest. He could remember calling Bobbi, calling and babbling something to her, something awful. Had Nora been screaming? Screaming? What did I do? He asked more urgently. The deputy looked at him for a moment. What?
Wrote the one that you're reading right now.
Stephen King. The deputy looked at him for a moment with a perfect, clear-eyed contempt. Shot your wife. That's what you did. Good fucking deal, huh? The deputy had gone back to his crazy magazine. That had been bad. This was worse. The depthest feeling, self-contempt. The grisly certainty that you had done bad things you couldn't remember. Not a few too many glasses of champagne at the New Year's Eve party. Put my foot up, try to warm my toesies. Where you put a lampshade on your head and boogied around the room with it slipping down over your eyes. Everyone in attendance, with the exception of your wife, thinking it was just the funniest thing they'd ever seen in their lives. Not knowing you did fun things like punching department heads or shooting your wife. It had been worse this time. How could it be worse than Nora? Something. For the time being, his head hurt too badly to even try reconstructing the last unknown period of time. Gardner looked down at the water, the waves bulging smoothly up toward where he sat. Forearms on his knees, head sagging. When the troughs passed, he could see barnacles and slick green seaweed. No, not really seaweed, green slime, like boogers. Shot your wife. Good fucking deal, huh? Gardner closed his eyes against the sickening pulse of pain, then opened them again. Jump in, a voice cajoled him softly. I mean, what the fuck? You don't really need any more of this shit, do you? Game called in the bottom of the first. Not official. Rain out. Be rescheduled when the great wheel of karma turns into the next life. Or the one after that. I had to spend the next morning making up for this by being a dung beetle or something. Hang up your jock, guard. Jump in. In your current state, both of your legs will cramp, and it'll be over quick. Gotta beat a bed sheet in a jail cell anyway. Go on, jump. He got up, stood swaying on the rocks, looking at the water. Just one big step. That's all it would take. He could do it in his sleep. Shit, almost had. Not yet. Want to talk to Bobbi first. The part of his mind which still wanted a little to live grasped at this idea. Bobbi. Bobbi was the only part of his old life that still seemed somehow whole and good. Bobbi was living down there in Haven, writing her westerns, still sane, still his friend of, if no longer his lover, his last friend. Want to talk to Bobbi first, okay? Why? So you can make a last stab at fucking her up too? God knows you tried hard enough. She's got a police record because of you, and undoubtedly her own FBI folder as well. Leave Bobbi out of this. Jump. Stop fucking around. He swayed forward, very close to doing it. The last part of him that still wanted to live seemed to have no arguments left, no delaying tactics. He could have said that he had stayed sober, more or less, for the last 3 years. There had been no blackouts since he and Bobbi had been arrested at Seabrook in 85. But that was a hollow argument. Except for Bobbi, he was now completely alone. His mind was in turmoil almost all of the time, returning again and again, even sober, to the subject of the nukes. He recognized that his original concern and anger had rotted into obsession. But recognition and rehabilitation were not the same things at all. His poetry had deteriorated. His mind had deteriorated. Worst of all, when he wasn't drinking, he wished he was. It's just that the hurting's all the time now. I'm like a bomb walking around and looking for a place to go off. Time to diffuse. Okay then. Okay. Closed his eyes and got ready. And as he did, an odd certainty came to him. An intuition so strong that it was nearly precognition. He felt that Bobbi needed to talk to him rather than the other way around. That it was no mind trick. She really was in some kind of trouble. Bad trouble. He opened his eyes and looked around like a man coming out of a deep daze. He would find a phone and call her. He couldn't say, "Hey, Bobbi, I had another blackout." And he wouldn't say, "I don't know where I am, Bobbi. This time there's no nose-picking deputy to stop me." He would say, "Hey, Bobbi, how you doing?" And when she told him she was doing okay, never better, shooting it out with the James gang in Northfield, or lighting out for the territories of with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And by the way, Guard, how's your own bad self? Guard would tell her he was fine, writing some good stuff for a change. Thinking of going over Vermont way for a bit, see some friends. Then he would go back to the end of the breakwater and jump off. Nothing fancy. He would just belly flop into the dead zone. That seemed to fit, after all. It was the way he had mostly gotten through the live one. The ocean had been a billion years or so. Had been here for a billion years or so. It would wait another 5 minutes while he did it. But laying it off on her, you hear me? Promise, Guard. No breaking down and blubbering. You're supposed to be her friend, not a male equivalent of her slime bucket sister. None of that shit. He had broken promises in his life, God knew, 1,000 of them to himself. But this one he would keep. He climbed clumsily up to the top of the breakwater. It was rough and rocky, a really fine place to break an ankle. He looked around apathetically for his scuffed brown tote bag, one he always took with him when he went off to read, or just to ramble, thinking it might be lodged in one of the holes between the rocks. It wasn't. It was an old campaigner, scuffed and battered, going back to the last troubled years of his marriage, something he had managed to hold on to while all the valuable things got lost. Well, now the tote had finally gone too. Clothes, toothbrush, bar of soap, and a plastic dish. A bunch of jerky meat sticks. It amused Bobbi to cure jerky in her shed sometimes. A $20 bill under the tote's bottom. And all his unpublished poems, of course. Poems were the least of his worries. The ones he had written over the last couple of years, and to which he had given the wonderful, witty, and upbeat title, The Radiation Cycle, had been submitted to 5 different publishers and rejected by all 5. One anonymous editor had scribbled, "Poetry and politics rarely mix. Poetry and propaganda never." This little homily was perfectly true. He knew it. Still, hadn't been able to stop. Well, the tide had administered the ultimate blue pencil to them. Go and do thou likewise, he thought, and lurched slowly along the breakwater toward the beach, thinking that his walk out to where he had wakened must have been better than a death-defying circus act. He walked in with the summer sun, rising up red and bloated from the Atlantic behind him. His shadow trailing out in front of him, and on the beach, a kid in jeans and t-shirt set off a string of firecrackers. Part 2. A marvel. His tote bag wasn't lost after all. It was lying upside down on the beach just above the high tide line, unzipped, looking at Gardner like a big leather mouth biting at the sand. He picked it up and looked inside. Everything was gone, even his frayed undies. He pulled up the tote's imitation leather bottom. 20 was gone too. Fond hope too quickly banished. Gardner dropped the tote. His notebooks, all 3 of them, lay a little further along the beach. One was resting on its covers in a tent shape. One lay soggily just below the high tide line, swelling up to the size of a telephone book. Hey, Phoebe! Phoebe! Harley, get out of there! Thought it was Phoebe. Here it was Harley. And the wind was leafing through the third idly. Don't bother, Gardner thought. Let leaves of an ass. The kid with the firecrackers came toward him, but not too close. Wants to be able to take off in a hurry if I turn out to be as weird as I undoubtedly look, Gardner thought. Smart kid. Got your stuff? Kid asked. His t-shirt showed a guy blowing his groceries. School lunch victim, the shirt said. Yeah, Gardner said. He bent down and picked up the soggy notebook, looked at it for a moment, and then tossed it down again. The kid handed him the other 2. What did he say? Don't bother, kid. The poems suck, kid. Poetry and politics rarely mix, kid. Poetry and propaganda never. Thanks, he said. Sure. The kid held the bag so Gardner could drop the 2 dry notebooks back inside. Surprised you got anything left at all. This place is full of rip-off artists in the summer. The park, I guess. The kid gestured with his thumb, and Gardner saw the roller coaster silhouetted against the sky. Guard's first thought was that he was somehow managed to roister all the way north, Old Orchard Beach, before collapsing. Second look changed his mind. No pier. Where am I? Gardner asked, and his mind harked back to an eerie totality to this jail cell. My husband? It's not my husband, I'm ignoring him. Okay. His mind harked back with an eerie totality to the jail cell and the nose-picking deputy. For a moment, he was sure the kid would say, Where do you think you are? Arcadia Beach. The kid looked half amused and half contemptuous. You must have really hung one on last night, mister. Last night and the night before, Gardner chanted, his voice a little rusty, a little eerie. Tommyknockers, Tommyknockers knocking at the door. The kid blinked at Gardner in surprise, and then delighted him by unexpectedly adding a couplet Gardner had never heard. Want to go out? Don't know if I can, 'cause I'm so afraid of the Tommyknocker man. Gardner grinned. The grin turned into a wince of fresh pain. Where'd you hear that, kid? My mom, when I was a baby. Heard about the Tommyknockers from my mother too, Gardner said. But never that part. The kid shrugged as if the topic had lost whatever marginal interest it might have had for him. She used to make all kinds of stuff up, he appraised Gardner. Don't you ache, kid? Gardner said, leaning forward solemnly. In the immortal words of Ed Sanders and Bully Kupferberg, I feel like homemade shit. You look like you've been drunk a long time. Yeah, how would you know? My mom. With her, it's always funny stuff, like the Tommyknockers are too hungover to talk. Did you give it up? Yeah, car crash, the kid said. Gardner was suddenly racked with shivers. The boy appeared not to notice. He studied the sky, tracing the path of a gull. It coursed a morning sky of blue, delicately shelled with mackerel scales, turning black for a moment as it flew in front of the sun's rising red eye. It landed on the breakwater, where it began to pick at something with which gulls presumably found tasty. Gardner looked from the gull to the kid. All of this was taking on decidedly ominous tones. The kid knew about the fabled Tommyknockers. How many kids in the world knew about them? What were the odds that Gardner would happen to stumble on one who both knew about them and had lost his mother because of drink? The kid reached in his pocket and brought out a small tangle of firecrackers. Sweet bird of youth, Gard thought and smiled. You want to light a couple? Celebrate the 4th? Might cheer you up. 4th? The 4th of July? Is that what this is? The kid gave him a dry smile. It ain't Arbor Day. The 26th of June had been, he counted backwards, good Christ, had been 8 days, which were painted black. Well, not quite. That actually would have been better. Patches of light, not at all welcome, were beginning to illuminate parts of his blackness. The idea that he had hurt someone again arose now in his mind as a certainty. He did not want to know who that Argle-Bargle was, and what he had done to him or her. Probably not. Best to call Bobby and finish himself before he remembered. Mister, how'd you get that scar on your forehead? Ran into a tree while I was skiing. Bet it hurt. Yeah, even worse than this. But not by much. Do you know where there's a payphone? The kid pointed to an eccentric green-roofed manse, which stood perhaps a mile down the beach. It topped a crumbling granite headland and looked like a cover of a paperback Gothic. It had to be a resort. After a moment's fumbling, Gardner came up with the name. That's the Alhambra. That's the Alhambra, isn't it? The one and only. Thanks, he said, and started off. Mister, he turned. Don't you want that last book? The kid pointed to the wet notebook lying in the high tide line. You could dry it out. Gardner shook his head. Kid, he said, I can't even dry me out. Sure you don't want to light off some firecrackers? Gardner shook his head, smiling. Be careful with them, okay? People hurt themselves with things that go bang. Okay. He smiled a little shyly. My mother did for a long time before, you know. I know. What's your name? Jack. What's yours? Guard. Happy 4th of July, Guard. Happy 4th, Jack. And watch out for the Tommyknockers. Knocking at my door, the kid agreed solemnly, and looked at Gardner with eyes which seemed queerly knowing. For a moment, Gardner seemed to feel a second premonition. Whoever would have guessed a hangover was so conducive to the psychic emanations of the universe? A bitter, sarcastic voice inside asked. He didn't know what of exactly, but it filled him with urgency about Bobby again. He tipped the kid away and set off up the beach. He walked at a fast, steady pace, although the sand drew at his feet, clinging, pulling. Soon his heart was racing and his head was thudding so hard his eyeballs seemed to pulse. The Alhambra did not seem to be drawing appreciably closer. Slow down or you'll have a heart attack or a stroke or both. He did slow down. And then... got a hair inside. There we go. And then doing so struck him as palpably absurd. Here he was, planning to drown himself in 15 minutes or so, but minding his heart in the meantime. It was like the old joke about the condemned man turning down a cigarette offered by the captain of the firing squad. I'm trying to quit, the guy says. Gardner picked up his pace again, and now the bolts of pain began to beat out steady pulses of jingle-jangle verses. Late last night, and the night before, Tommyknockers, knocking at the door. I was crazy, and Bobbi was sane, but that was before the Tommyknockers came. Stopped. What is this Tommyknocker shit? Just have an answer. That deep voice, as terrifying and sure as Yet as sure as the voice of a loon crying out in an empty lake came back, Bobby's in trouble. He began to walk again, getting up to his former brisk pace, and then moving even faster. Want to go out, he thought. Don't know if I can, because I'm so afraid of the Tommyknocker man. He was climbing the weather-whitened stairs, which led up to the side of a granite headland from the beach to the hotel, when he wiped his hand across his nose and saw that it was bleeding again. That's the estimate on my car. That's my notebook. We're going to get that out of the way because I need this. There we go. Here's the book more steady. Oh, I do apologize. I yawned. Part 3. Gardner lasted exactly 11 seconds in the lobby of the Alabaster, long enough for the desk clerk to see he had no shoes on. The clerk nodded to the husky bellman when Gardner began to protest, and the two of them gave him a bum's rush. They would have booted me even if I had been wearing shoes, Guard reflected. Shit, I would have booted me. He had gotten a good look at himself in the glass of the lobby door. Too good. He had managed to mop most of the blood off his face with his sleeve. But there were still traces. His eyes were bloodshot and starry. His week's growth of beard made him look like a porcupine about 6 weeks after his shearing. In the genteel summer world of the Alhambra, where men and women wore tennis skirts, he looked like a male bag lady. Because only the earliest risers had begun to stir. The bellman took the time to inform him there was a payphone at the mobile station, intersection of US 1 and Route 26. Get the hell out of here before I call the cops. If he had needed to know more about himself than he already did, it was in the husky bellman's disgusted eyes. Gardner trudged slowly down the hill toward the gas station. His socks flapped and flailed against the tar. His heart knocked like a wheezy Model T engine that's experienced too much hard traveling and too little maintenance. He could feel the headache moving to the left, where it would eventually center in a brilliant pinpoint. If he'd had plans to live that long, anyway, suddenly he was 17 again. Why do I have to yawn? He was 17 and his obsession wasn't nukes, but Nookie. The girl's name was Anna Marie, and he thought he was going to make it with her pretty soon, maybe. If he didn't lose his nerve. If he kept his cool. Maybe even tonight. Part of keeping his cool was doing okay today. Today, right here. Here being Straight Arrow, an intermediate ski trail at Victory Mountain in Vermont. He was looking down at his skis and mentally... Why is this not going still? There we go. Mentally reviewing the steps necessary to come to your basic snowplow stop. Reviewing as he would study for a test, wanting to pass. Knowing he was still pretty new at this and Anne-Marie wasn't. And he somehow didn't think she would be so apt to come across if he ended up looking like Frosty the Snowman his first day off the beginner's slopes. He didn't mind looking a little inexperienced, as long as he didn't look downright stupid. So, there he had been, looking stupidly down at his feet instead of where he was going, which was directly at a gnarled old pine with a warning red stripe painted on its bark, and the only sounds were the wind in his ears and the snow sliding dryly under his skis. They were the same soothing hushaby sound. Shh. It was the rhyme that broke into memory, making him stop near the mobile station. The rhyme came back and it stayed, beating in time with the throbbing head. Late last night and the night before, Tommyknockers knocking at the door. Guard hawked, tasted the coppery, unpleasant flavor of his own blood, spat a reddish glob of phlegm into the trash-littered dirt of the soft shoulder. He remembered asking his mother who or what Tommyknockers were. He couldn't remember what, if anything, she had replied. But he'd always thought they must be highwaymen, robbers who stole by moonlight, killed in shadow, buried in the darkest part of the night. And hadn't he spent one tortured, endless half hour in the darkness of his bedroom before sleep finally decided to be merciful and claim him, thinking they might be cannibals as well as robbers? That instead of burying their victims in the dark of the night, they might have cooked them and, well, Guard wrapped his thin arms. There didn't seem to be any restaurants up in the cyclone around his chest and shuddered. He crossed to the mobile station, which was hung with bunting, but not yet open. The signs out front read, Super Unleaded, 99 cents, and God Bless America, and We Love Winnebagos. Yeah, 99 cents again. Nice. The payphone was on the side of the building. Gardner was grateful to find that it was one of the new ones. You could dial long distance without depositing any money. That at least spared him the indignity of spending part of his last morning on Earth panhandling. He punched 0 and then had to stop. His hand was shaking wildly. It was all over the place. He cocked the phone between head and shoulder this time, leaving both hands free. Grasped his right wrist with his left hand to hold the hand steady. Steady as possible, anyway. Now, looking like a shooter at a target range, he used his forefinger to punch the buttons with a slow and horrible deliberation. The robot voice told him to punch in either his telephone credit card number, a task Guard thought he would have been utterly incapable of performing, even if he'd had such a card, or 0 for an operator. Gardner hit 0. Hi, happy holiday, this is Eileen, voice chirruped. May I have your billing, please? Hi, Eileen, happy holiday to you too. I'd like to bill the call collect to anyone from Jim Gardner. Thank you, Jim. You're welcome, he said, and then suddenly, no, change that. Tell her it's Guard calling. As Bobbi's telephone began to ring here and there in Haven, Gardner turned and looked toward the rising sun. It was even redder than before, rising toward the scud of thickening mackerel scales, like a great round blister in the sky. The sun and the clouds together brought another childhood rhyme to mind. Red sky at night, sailors delight. Wow. Red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Guard didn't know about red sky at morning or at night, but he knew those delicate scales of cloud were a reliable harbinger of rain. Too goddamn many rhymes for a man's last morning on Earth, he thought irritably. And then, I'm going to wake you up, Bobbi. Going to wake you up, but I promise you I'll never do it again. But there was no Bobbi to wake up. The phone rang, and that was all. Rang, and rang, and rang. Your party doesn't answer, the operator told him, just in case he was deaf, or had maybe forgotten what he was doing for a couple seconds. He was holding the phone against his asshole instead of his ear. Would you like to try again later? Yeah, maybe. But it'd have to be by Ouija board, Eileen. Okay, he said. You have a good one. Thank you, Guard. He pulled the phone away from his ear, as if it had bitten him, and stared at it for a moment. She had sounded so much like Bobbi. So goddamn much. He put the phone back and got as far as, why did you, before realizing that cheerful Eileen had clicked off. Eileen, not Bobbi, but She had called him guard. Bobby was the only one who... No, change that, he'd said. Tell her it's guard calling. There, perfectly reasonable explanation. Then why didn't it seem that way? He hung up slowly. He stood at the side of the mobile station in wet socks, shrunken pants, and untucked shirt. His shadow long and long. Phalanx of motorcycles went by on Route 1, headed for Maine. Bobby's in trouble. Will you please let that go? It's bullshit, as Bobbi herself would say. Somebody tell you the only holiday you can go home for was Christmas? She went back to Utica for the glorious 4th, that's all. Yeah, sure. Bobbi was as likely to go back to Utica for the 4th as Guard was to apply as an intern at the new Bay State nuclear plant. Sister Anne would probably celebrate the holiday by ramming a few M80s up Bobbi's coos and lighting them. Well, maybe she got invited to a parade marshal. To be parade marshal or sheriff marshal, haha, in one of those cow towns she's always writing about. Child. I knew he wasn't going to start his game all over. My son, he's in Lego Dimensions, and he was going to start all over if he didn't get what he wanted right away instead of Christmas. At least they're getting one thing. In one of those cow towns she's always writing about, Deadwood, Abilene, Dodge City, someplace like that. You did what you could. Now finish what you started. His mind made no effort to argue. He would have dealt with that. Instead, it only reiterated its original thesis. Bobby's in trouble. Just an excuse, you chicken shit bastard. He didn't think so. Intuition was solidifying into certainty. And whether it was bullshit or not, that voice continued to insist that Bobbi was in a jam. Until he knew, one way or the other for sure, he supposed he could table his personal business. As he had told himself not long ago, the ocean wasn't going anywhere. Maybe the Tommyknockers got her, said out loud and then laughed. Scared, husky little laugh. He was going crazy. We're going to read 7 and then I'm going to stop. I'm not feeling well this morning. Chapter 7. Part 1, Chapter 7. Gardner arrives. Part 1. Shush. He's staring down at his skis. Plain brown wood strips racing over the snow.
Hey.
Yeah. He started looking down just to make sure he was keeping the skis nice and parallel. Not wanting to look like a snow bunny with no business here after all. Now he's almost hypnotized by the liquid speed of his skis. The crystal flicker of snow passing in the steady white strip, 6 inches wide, between the skis. He doesn't realize his state of semi-hypnosis until Anna Marie screams, "Guard, watch out, watch out!" It's like being roused from a light daze. That's when he realizes he's been in a semi-trance. That he had been looking down at that shiny, flowing strip for far too long. And Marie screams, "Stem Christie, guard Stem Christie!" She screams again, and this time she is telling him to fall down. Just fall down. Christ, you could break a leg that way. In these last few words, before the crunching impact, he still can't comprehend how things got serious so fast. He had somehow managed to drift far off to the left side of the trail. Pines and spruces, their blue-gray branches heavy with snow, are blurring past.
You have like
less
a
than
donate page, like where people can send you money on PayPal if they like your.
Patreon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
See that? Like you can create a page for PayPal directly for people to donate to you. Just
Pines and spruces, their blue-gray branches heavy with snow, are blurring past less than 3 yards from him. A rock poking out of the snow blips by. His left ski has missed it by inches. He realizes with cold horror that he has lost all control. He's forgotten everything Anne-Marie has taught him. Maneuvers that seem so easy on the kiddie slopes. Hey! Get out of there. Why are you in there? Get out of the plastic. Harley, out of the plastic. Go. There's nothing back there for you two. It's all my stuff. And you don't need to be in the plastic. Now go. Go. If you two don't get out of the plastic, I'm going to knock you outside. What? And now he's going, 20 miles an hour, 30, 40? Cold air cuts against his face, and he sees the line of trees at the edge of the straight arrow trail, getting even closer. His own straight arrow has become a mild diagonal. Mild, but enough to be deadly, just the same. He sees his path will soon take him off the trail completely, and then he will stop, you bet. Then he will stop very quickly. She shrieks again, and he thinks, Stem Christie. Did she really say that? I can't even snowplow for beans, and she wants me to do a Stem Christie. He tries to turn right, but his skis remain stubbornly on course. Now he can see the tree he'll hit. A big, hoary old pine. Hoary. A red strip has been painted around its gnarly trunk. A wholly unnecessary danger signal. He tries again to turn, but he's forgotten how to do it. The tree swells, seeming to rush toward him, while he himself remains still. He can see jagged knobs, splintery, groping butts of branches on which he may impale himself. He can see nicks in the old bark. He can see drips where the red paint has run. Anne-Marie shrieks again, and he's aware he himself is screaming. Whoosh. Part 2. Mister, are you all right? Gardner sat up suddenly, startled, expecting to pay for the movement with a whacking thud of pain through his head. There was none. He experienced a moment of vertigo that might have come from hunger, but his head was clear. The headache had passed in its sudden way while he slept, perhaps even while he was dreaming of this accident. I'm okay, he said, looking around. His head thudded now, but against a drum. A girl in cut-off denim jeans laughed. You're supposed to use sticks on those, man. Not your head. You were mumbling in your sleep. He saw he was in a van, and now everything fell in place. Was I? Yeah, not good mumbles. It wasn't a good dream, Gardner said. Have a hit off this, the girl said, and handed him a joint. The roach clip it was in, he saw, was a golden oldie. Richard Nixon in a blue suit, fingers thrust up in the characteristic double V gesture that probably not even the oldest of the 5 other people in the van remembered. Guaranteed to cure all bad dreams, the girl added solemnly. That's what they told me about the booze, Lady Day. Hey, babe. But sometimes they lie. Take it from me. Sometimes they lie. Oh, Phoebe, come here. You need to let him come down. Come here. Phoebe, come here. There you go. Let Daddy come down. Yeah. Yeah, give me a sec. Be right back, guys. Do you need me to mute? Or you just want me to pause so you can come past? Yeah, you just want me to pause. I just put it on BRB. Yeah, like, be right back. What do you want? No, you stop. I'm finishing up 7 and then I'm done. So 1, 2, 3, 4 pages plus the half I'm on. Or the... Yeah, Tristan said something about that. I was going to use the plunger. See if it worked. It didn't work. All right. Well, then we'll get some liquid plumber to put down that tub. Yeah? Sure. Watch out, please. Oh. Watch out, Harley. No, you stay up here. Phoebe, back here. Good girl. You don't need it in the basement. It's not good for you to be down there. There's too much stuff. You might get into trouble down there. Well, you guys are knocking down my plastic, I can tell. But if I sit like this, I actually have my own little spot. This is kind of cool. Yes, can I help you? Why are you smacking me in the head? Look. Show everybody. You're smacking me in the head. You're smacking me in the head. Mwah. What do you need? You have food. You have water. Oh, you want attention while I'm trying to read. Is that it? All right, let me finish. Let me see where I'm at. No, yes, I'm reading. Ow, ow, ow. Are you going to let me read or no? What are you guys doing to my plastic? Stop it. You're going to tear it down. Stop. I don't want you to tear it down. Stop. Go. Look, you've already started trying to tear it down. Look at that. You've already torn a whole piece down. Now I'm going to encase myself. I'm going to have to put cloth up and say, ow! That was my... Yeah, that hurt. Don't you smack me. Don't you smack me. She's just staring at me like... Go get Mama. Why don't you go play with your toy? You can be up here if you want to. I can sit here and pet you while I'm reading. He took a small hit off the joint for politeness' sake and felt his head begin to swim almost at once. He handed it back to the girl who was sitting against the van's sliding door and said, I'd rather have something to eat. Got a box of crackers, the driver said and handed it back. He ate everything else. We ate everything else. Beaver even ate the fucking prunes. Sorry. Beaver'd eat anything, the girl in the cutoff said. The kid in the van's shotgun seat looked back. He was a plump boy with a wide, pleasant face. Untrue, he said. Untrue. I'd never eat my mother. At least he's not a cannibal. At that, they were all laughing wildly, Gardner included. When he was able, he said, the crackers are fine, really. And they were. He ate slowly at first, tentatively, monitoring his works closely for signs of rebellion. There were none, and he began to eat faster and faster until he was gobbling the crackers in big handfuls, his stomach snarling and yapping. When had he last eaten? He didn't know. It was lost in the blackout. He did know from previous experience that he never ate much when he was busy trying to drink up the world, and a lot of what he tried to eat either ended up in his lap or ran down his shirt. That made him think of the big, greasy pizza he'd tried to eat Thanksgiving Eve in 1980. The night he had shot Nora through the cheeks. Or he could have severed one or both optic nerves, his lawyer suddenly shouted furiously at him inside his head. Partial or total blindness, paralysis, death. All that bullet had to do was chip one tooth to go flying off in any direction. Any damn direction at all. Just one. And don't sit there and try to any bullshit like how you didn't mean to kill her either. You shoot a person in the head, what else are you trying to do? The depression came rolling back, big, black, and a mile high. Should have killed yourself, guard. Shouldn't have waited. Bobby's in trouble. Well, maybe so, but getting help from a guy like you is like hurting a pyromaniac to fix an oil burner. Is hiring a pyromaniac to fix an oil burner. Shut up. You're wasted, guard. Fried. What that kid back there on the beach would undoubtedly call a burnout. Mister, you sure you're all right? The girl asked. Her hair was red, cut punkily short. Her legs went approximately up to her chin. Huh. Yeah, he said. Did I look not all right? For a minute there, you looked troubled. You look terrible, she answered gravely. That made him grin. Not what she'd said, but the solemnity with which she'd said it, and she grinned back, relieved. He looked out the window and saw they were headed north on the main turnpike, only up to mile 36, so he couldn't have slept too long. The feathery mackerel scales of 2 hours ago were beginning to merge into a toneless gray that promised rain by afternoon. Before he got to Haven, it would probably be dark and he would be soaked. After hanging up the telephone at the mobile station, he had stripped off his socks and tossed them into the waste can on one of the gasoline islands. Then he walked over to Route 1 northbound in his bare feet and stood on the shoulder, old tote bag in hand, the thumb of his other out and cocked north. 20 minutes later, this van had come along. Fairly new Dodge Caravel with Delaware plates. A pair of electric guitars, their necks crossed like swords. Oh, that's kind of cool. Were painted on the side, along with the name of the group inside, the Eddie Parker Band. It pulled over and Gardner had run to it, panting, tote bag banging his leg, headache pulsing white-hot pain into the left side of his head. In spite of the pain, he had been amused by the slogan carefully lettered across the van's doors. If Eddie's rockin', don't come knockin'. Now, sitting on the floor and back, and reminding himself not to turn around quickly and thump the snare drum again, Gardner saw the old orchard exit coming up. At the same time, the few drops of rain hit the windshield. Listen, Eddie said, pulling over. I hate to leave you off like this. It's starting to rain, and you don't even have any fucking shoes. I'll be all right. Hey, babe. See what the doggies did? See what the dogs did? But check this out. If this goes out a little further, it actually would need to come all the way around like this in order for it to cover everything. So, we'll figure it out. You don't look so all right, the girl in the cutoff said softly. Eddie whipped off his hat. Don't blame me, I voted for Howard the Duck, written over the visor. Do you remember when they voted for Howard the Duck as president? That was funny. And said, cough up, you guys. Wallets appeared. Change jingled in jean pockets. No, hey, thanks, but no. Gardner felt hot blood rush into his cheeks and burn there. Not embarrassment, but outright shame. Somewhere inside him, he felt a strong, painful thud. It didn't rattle his teeth or bones. It was, he thought, his soul taking some final fall. It sounded melodramatic as hell. As far as how it felt, well, it just felt real. That was the horrible part about it. Just real. Okay, he thought. That's what it feels like. All your life you've heard people talk about hitting bottom. This is what it feels like. Here it is. James Eric Gardner, who is going to be the Ezra Pound of his generation, taking spare change from a Delaware bar band. Really? No. Eddie Parker went on passing the hat just the same. There was a bunch of change, a few $1 bills in it. Beaver got the hat last. He tossed in a couple of quarters. Look, Gardner said, I appreciate it, but come on, Beaver. Eddie said, cough up, you fucking Scrooge. Really, I have friends in Portland. I'll just call a few up. And I think I might have left my checkbook with this one guy I know in Falmouth, Gardner added wildly. Beaver's a Scrooge. The girl in the cutoffs began to chant gleefully. Beaver's a Scrooge. Beaver's a Scrooge. The others picked it up until Beaver, laughing and rolling his eyes, added another quarter and a New York lottery ticket. There, I'm tapped, he said. Unless you want to wait around for the prunes to work. The guys in the band and the girl in the cutoffs were laughing wildly again, looking resignedly at Gardner, as if to say, "You see the morons I have to deal with. You dig it?" Beaver handed the hat to Gardner, who had to take it. If he hadn't, the change would have rolled all over the van floor. "Really," he said, trying to give the hat back to Beaver. "I'm perfectly okay." "You ain't," Eddie Parker said. "So cut the bullshit. What do you say?" "I guess I say thanks. It's all I could think of right now." "Well, it ain't so much you'll have to declare it on your income taxes," Eddie said, "but it'll buy you some burgers and a pair of those rubber sandals." The girl slid open the door of the caravel's sidewall. "Get better, understand?" she said. Then, before he could reply, she hugged him and gave him a kiss, her mouth moist, friendly, half open, and redolent of pot. "Take care, big guy." "I'll try." On the verge of getting out, he suddenly hugged her again, fiercely. "Thank you. Thank you all." He stood at the end of the ramp, the rain falling a little harder now, watching as the van's sidewall door rumbled shut on its track. The girl waved. Gardner waved back, and then the van was rolling down the breakdown lane, gathering speed, finally sliding over into the travel lane. Gardner watched them go, one hand still raised in a wave in case they might be looking back. Tears were running freely down his cheeks now, mixed with the rain. Part 3. He never did get a chance to buy a pair of rubber sandals, but he got to Haven before dark, and he didn't have to walk the last 10 or so miles to Bobby's house, as he thought he might. You'd think people would be more apt to pick up a guy hitchhiking in the rain, but that was just when they were most likely to pass you by. Who needed a human puddle in the passenger seat? But he got a ride outside of Augusta with a farmer who complained constantly and bitterly about the government all the way up to the Chinatown line, where he let Guard out. Guard walked a couple of miles, thumbing the few cars that passed, wondering if his feet were turning to ice or if it was just his imagination, when a pulp truck pulled to a rackety halt beside him. Gardner climbed into the cab as fast as he could. It smelled of old wood chips and sour lager sweat. It was warm. "Thanks," he said. "Don't mention it," the driver said. "Name's Freeman Moss." He stuck out a hand. Gardner, who had no idea that he would meet this man in the not-too-distant future under far less cheery circumstances, took it and shook it. "James Gardner, thanks again." "Shoot a pickle," Freeman Moss scoffed. He got the truck moving. It shuddered along the edge of the road, picked up speed, Gardner thought. Not just grudgingly, but with actual pain. Everything shook. The universal moaned beneath them like a hag in a chimney corner. The world's oldest toothbrush. Its eroded bristles, dark with the grease it had employed to coax out some clotted gear or cog tooth, chittered along the dashboard, passing an old air freshener of a naked woman with large breasts on its way. Moss punched the clutch, managed to find second after an endless time spent grinding gears, and wrestled the pulp truck back onto the road. "You look half drowned." "Got half a thermos of coffee from the Dunkin' Donuts in Augusta left over from my dinner. You want it?" Garner drank it gratefully. It was strong, hot, and heavily laced with sugar. He also accepted a cigarette from the driver, dragging deeply and with pleasure, although it hurt his throat, which was getting steadily sorer. Moss dropped him off just over the Haven town line, 6:45. The rain had slacked off, and the sky was lightening up in the west. "Do you believe God's gonna let through some sunset?" Freeman Moss said. "I wish like hell I had a pair of shoes I could give you, mister. I usually carry an old pair behind the seat, but it was so rainy today I never brought nothing but My gum rubbers. Thanks, but I'll be fine. My friend is less than a mile up the road. Actually, Bobby's place was still 3 miles away. But if he told Moss that, nothing would do but that he drive Gardner up there. Gardner was tired, increasingly feverish, still damp, even after 45 minutes in the heater's dry, blasting air. What you looking for? I was gonna say, if you're looking for a spatula, look left in the other drawer. There should be a wooden one. And he couldn't stand any more kindness today, in his present state of mind. It could, well, drive him crazy. Okay, good luck. Thank you. He got down and waved as the truck took off on the side road and rumbled away toward home. Even after Moss and his museum piece of a truck had disappeared, Gardner stood where he was for a moment longer, his wet toe bag in one hand, his bare feet, white as Easter lilies, planted in the dirt of the soft shoulder, looking at the markers some 200 feet back the way he had come. Home is the place where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in, Frost had said. But he'd do well to remember he wasn't home. Maybe the worst mistake a man could make was to get to the idea that his friend's home was his own, especially when the friend was a woman whose bed you had once shared. Not home, not at all, but he was in Haven. He started to walk up the road toward Bobby's house. Part 4. About 15 minutes later, when the clouds in the west finally broke open to let through the westering sun, something strange happened. A burst of music, clear and brief, went through his head. He stopped, looking at the sunlight as it spilled across rolling miles of wet woods and hayfields in the west. Let me show some of my boys. Not my boys. The rays beaming down like the dramatic sun rays in the DeMille Bible epic. Route 9 began to rise here, and the western view was long and gorgeous and solemn. The evening's light somehow English and pastoral in its clear beauty. The rain had given the landscape a sleek, washed look. Deepening colors, seeming to fulfill the texture of things. Gardner was suddenly very glad he had not committed suicide. Not in any corny art link-letter way, but because he had been allowed this moment of beauty and perceptual glow. Standing here, now almost at the end of his energy, feverish and sick, he felt a child's simple wonder. All was still and silent in the final sunshine of evening. He could see no sign of industry or technology. Humanity, yes. A big red barn attached to a white farmhouse, sheds, a trailer or two. That was all. The light, it was the light that struck him so strongly. Its sweet clarity, so old and deep, those rays of sun slanted almost horizontally. Yeah, we're almost done. Through the unraveling clouds, as this long, confusing, exhausting day neared its end. That ancient light seemed to deny time itself, and Gardner almost expected to hear a huntsman winding his horn, announcing, "All assemble." He would hear dogs and horse hooves, and that was when the music, jarring and modern, blasted through his head, scattering all thought. His hands flew to his temples in a startled gesture. The burst lasted about 5 seconds, perhaps as long as 10, and what he heard was perfectly identifiable. It was Dr. Hook singing "Baby Make Her Blue Jeans Talk." The lyric was tiny but clear enough. Tinny but clear enough. As if he was listening to a small transistor radio, the kind that people used to take to the beach with them before the punk rock group Walkman and the ghetto blasters had taken over the world. But it wasn't pouring into his ears, that lyric. It was coming from the front of his head, from the place where the doctors had filled a hole in his skull with a piece of metal. The queen of all the night birds, a player in the dark. She doesn't say nothing, but baby makes her blue jeans talk. The volume was so loud it was almost unbearable. It had happened once before, this music in his head. After he'd stuck his finger in a light socket. Well, that was stupid. And he was drunk, and was he drunk at the time? My dear, does a dog piss on a fire plug? He had discovered such musical visitations were neither hallucinatory nor all that rare. People had gotten radio transmissions on lawn flamingos in their yards, on teeth fillings, on steel rims of their spectacles. For a week and a half in 57, a family in Charlotte, North Carolina, had discovered signals from a classical music station in Florida. They first heard them coming from the bathroom water glass. Soon other glasses in the house began to pick up the sound. Before it ended, the whole house was filled with the eerie sound of glassware broadcasting Bach and Beethoven. Wow, Beethoven. The music broken only by the occasional time check. Finally, with a dozen violins holding one long, high note, almost all the glasses in the house shattered spontaneously and the phenomenon ceased. So, Gardner had known he wasn't alone. What are you cooking? Oh, I know what that is. Never mind. And had been sure he wasn't going crazy. But that wasn't much comfort, and never had been, as long as loud as this after the light socket incident. The sound of Dr. Hood faded as quickly as it came. Gardner stood tensely, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. What came instead, louder and more urgent than before, was a repetition of what had gotten him going in the first place. Bobby's in trouble. He turned away from the western view, started up Route 9 again. And although he was feverish and very tired, he walked fast, in fact. Before long, he was almost running. Part 5. It was 7:30 when Gardner finally arrived at Bobby's, what the locals still called the Garrick place, even after all these years. Gardner came swinging up the road, puffing, his color high and unhealthy. Here was the Royal Free Delivery Box, its door slightly ajar. In the way, both Bobby and Joe Alston, the mailman, left it so that it was easier for Peter to paw open. There was the driveway, and Bobby's blue pickup truck parked in it. The stuff in the truck bed had been covered with a tarp to protect it from the rain. And there was the house itself, with the light shining through the east window, the one where Bobby kept her rocker and did her reading. Everything looked all right. Not a single sour note. 5 years ago, even 3, Peter would have barked at the arrival of a stranger outside. But Peter had gotten older. Hell, they all had. Standing out here, Bobby's place had a sort of quiet, pastoral loveliness that the western view at the town line had held for him. It represented all the things Gardner wished he had for himself: a sense of peace, and maybe just a sense of place. Certainly he could see nothing odd as he stood here by the mailbox. It felt, like the house of a person who is content with herself. Not completely at rest exactly, or retired, or checked out from the world's concerns, but rocking steadily. This was the house of a sane, relatively happy woman. It had not been built in the tornado belt. All the same, something was wrong. He stood there, the stranger out here in the dark. And I'm not a stranger, but I'm a friend of her friend, Bobby's friend. Aren't I? Sudden, frightening impulse rose within him to leave. Just turn on one bare heel and bug out, because he suddenly doubted if he wanted to find out what was going on inside that house, what kind of trouble Bobby had gotten herself into. Tommyknockers, guard. That's what kind. Tommyknockers, he shivered. Late last night and the night before, Tommyknockers at Bobby's door, and I don't know if I can. Stop it, because guard's so afraid of the Tommyknocker man. He licked his lips, trying to tell himself it was just the fever that made him feel so dry. Get out, guard. Blood on the moon. The fear was now very deep indeed, and if it had been anyone but Bobby, anyone but his last real friend, he would have split all right. The farmhouse looked rustic and pleasant. The light spilling from the east window was cozy, and all looked well. But the boards and the glass, stone in the driveway, the very air pressure against his face, all these things screamed at him to leave, get out. The things inside that house were bad, dangerous, perhaps even evil. Tommyknockers. But whatever else was in there, Bobby was too. He hadn't come all these miles, most in the pouring rain, to turn and run in the last second. So, in spite of the dread, he left the mailbox and started up the driveway, moving slowly, wincing at the sharp stones dug at the tender soles of his feet. Then the front door jerked open, startling his heart up into his throat in a single nimble bound, and he thought, "It's one of them, one of the Tommyknockers. It's going to rush down here and grab me and eat me up." He was barely able to stifle a scream. The silhouette in the door was thin, much too thin, he thought, to be Bobbi Anderson, who had never been beefy, but who was solidly built and pleasantly round in all the right places. But the voice, shrill and wavering though it was unmistakably Bobby's, and Gardner relaxed a little, because Bobby sounded even more terrified than he thought, standing by the mailbox and looking at the house. "Who is it? Who's there?" "It's guard, Bobby." There was a long pause. There were footfalls on the porch. Cautiously, "Guard, is it really you?" "Yeah." He worked his way over the hard, biting stones of the driveway to the lawn, and he asked the question he had come all this way and deferred his own suicide to ask. "Bobby, are you all right?" The quaver left Bobby's voice. Gardner could still not see her clearly. The sun had long since gone behind the trees, and the shadows were thick. He wondered where Peter was. "I'm fine," Bobby said, just as if she had always looked so terribly thin, just as though she had always greeted arrivals at the dooryard with a shrill voice full of fear. She came down the porch steps and passed out of the shadow of the overhanging porch roof, and as she did, Gardner got his first good look at her. In the ashy twilight, he was struck by horror and wonder. Bobby was coming toward him, smiling, obviously delighted to see him. Her jeans fluttered and flapped on her, and so did her shirt. Her face was gaunt, her eyes deep in their sockets, her forehead pale, and somehow too wide, the skin taut and shiny. Bobby's uncombed hair flopped against the nape of her neck and lay over her shoulders like water we'd cast on the beach. The shirt was buttoned wrong. The fly of her jeans was 3/4 of the way down. She smelled dirty and sweaty and, well, as if she might have had an accident in her pants and then forgotten to change them. A picture suddenly flashed into Gardner's mind, a photo of Karen Carpenter, taken shortly before her death, which had allegedly resulted from anorexia nervosa. It had seemed to him the picture of a woman already dead but somehow alive, a woman who was all smiling teeth and shrieking feverish eyes. Bobby looked like that now. Surely she had lost no more than 20 pounds. That was all she could afford to lose and stay on her feet. The guard's shocked mind kept insisting it was more like 30. It had to be. She seemed to be on the last raggedy end of exhaustion. Her eyes, like the eyes of that poor lost woman on the magazine cover, were huge and glittery. Her smile, the huge brainless grin of a KO'd fighter just before his knees came unhinged. "Fine," the scrambling, dirty, stumbling skeleton reiterated as Bobby approached. Gardner could hear the waver in her voice again. Not fear, as he'd thought, but utter exhaustion. "Thought you'd given up on me. Good to see you, man." Bobby cried. "Jesus Christ, what?" Bobbi was holding out a hand to Gardner to take. It trembled wildly in the air, and Gardner saw how woefully, incredibly thin Bobbi's arm had become. A lot of stuff going on, Bobbi croaked in her wavering voice. A lot of work done, hell of a lot more left to do. But I'm getting there. Getting there. Wait till you'll see. Bobbi, what? Fine, I'm fine, Bobbi repeated. And she fell forward, semi-conscious into Gardner's arms. She tried to say something else, but only a loose gargle and a little spit came out. Her breasts were small, wasted pads against his forearm. Gardner picked her up, shocked by how light she was. Yes, it was 30, at least 30. It was incredible, but not, unfortunately, deniable. He felt recognition that was both shocking and miserable. This isn't Bobbi at all. It's me. Me at the end of a jag. He carried Bobbi swiftly up the steps and into the house. And that, my dears, is where we're going to stop for today. I need to lay down. I'm starting to get a headache, so hopefully I'll be here tonight. I should be anyway. And we will continue where we left off. So we read chapter 6 this morning. All right. So y'all have a good day. Enjoy your Wednesday. And I will hopefully see you guys tonight. All right. Follow if you haven't. And I will talk to y'all later. Love you. Bye. Have a good day.